Hey everybody, this is Rice Bonds Montana DeYoung back here with you again, and it's Friday. It's March 11th, and I have had a couple of packages waiting for me for a couple of weeks now. Just haven't found the time to crack them open. It's been such a long time that I actually don't even remember what most of the cards are supposed to be in the individual package. But I guess that's part of the fun of opening these up. They're the closest thing that I'm ever going to get to the thrill of opening packs again, which is, the thing that we did as kids and the thing that we are most nostalgic about, I think. The part of the experience that we most remember, at least that I most remember as a kid, was to go to the card shop, open packs, and then when things were really clicking, go to the public library in town and trade cards. 1989, 1990 Donruss with other people using the Beckett Almanac that you could just sort of check out or borrow from the library. It was great fun. So, who knows what component of card collecting is nostalgia? I was talking to a friend of mine, a fellow bonds collector, who believes that these cards are not long for this earth. The value of these cards are not going to be is robust in the long term as a lot of us would hope and a lot of us like to think. He believes that baseball is dying and that a lot of people don't care about it anymore. His point was that, like who's the best player in baseball right now? It's Mike Trout, and how many kids, who aren't total baseball nerds know who he even is? How many people in the world who are casual sports fans know who he is? And so his point is that if the mythology and mystique of baseball doesn't continue to subsequent generations, then these pieces of cardboard will become more and more like what they actually are tangibly, which is just pieces of paper, rather than containing all sorts of meaning and memory for the many people who love collecting. So, anyways, that is kind of a weird introduction, but I've been having cards trickle in over the weeks, and I just haven't had the chance to properly open them on camera. Some of them I have, other ones I just sort of wanted to open and make sure that they were there. After a recent experience I had with a card not showing up, a very major card not showing up in the mail when I expected it to, and the card missing completely from the box. Been a little bit traumatized by that, so sometimes, if I think that I need to look at a card and make sure that it's there, then I won't even wait to do it on video. I'll just open it and make sure that it's there. And so far, so good. I haven't had another repeat of that experience, and that experience itself wasn't a repeat of any particular experience either. I think it was a singular experience. It was a learning experience. It's not one I want to repeat again. But it is interesting though. There's another video that I'm going to be putting up later that where I take another risk, an unnecessary risk. I think sometimes you just you get a feeling, you're blinded by your desire for a card, and you make a mistake or you do something a little bit rash, and that's not the first time that happened. That's the first time I got burned, and hopefully it's the last time. So, anyways, to the packages. Before I do, I got one card in. This is from Puerto Rico. A big deal to me. This is the 1999 Stadium Club Barry Bonds autograph from the umbrella company Topps. It's not. It's a pretty unassuming card. It's from the era when Bonds' autograph was still just initials BBS. But I noticed that the ink and the pen work actually was extremely complete and extremely beautiful. I would, of course, love a card that's in perfect condition so that I can admire its perfect condition and maybe even get it graded. But as you can see down at the bottom there, there's a little bit of touching at the edge there, especially right there. But it's nothing that would ever distract me from appreciating a card. For me, the subgrade, if you will, that matters the most to me is the surface, the registration, the photography, the way the ink is, imprinted on the front of the card, the smoothness and the scratch-free aspect of a card, the original gloss, being able to see the texture of the glossy cardboard and not have any blemish on there is extremely important to me. Way more important to me than corner damage and especially edge damage. Edge damage or wear is the definitely the subgrade that I care about the least, followed probably by corners. Centering, it really does depend. I think for cards that are like this, that are full bleed, where you need to be an absolute expert in the set to even know whether it's off center, it doesn't bother me nearly as much if you have to be an expert. If you can't tell from the face of the card whether it's centered or not, what is the point, honestly? I mean, I'm sure there's a way if you're an expert in 1999 Stadium Club, to look at the team insignia up there in the top left and make sure that the left edge and the top edge are equidistant from the beginning of the insignia, perhaps. Maybe the distance from the top of the ball to the top edge and the bottom of this Barry Bonds red lettering here to the bottom edge is how you would measure top bottom centering. But like I said before, I mean, if this was a little bit up or a little bit down, would we really even notice? Without borders that are meant to be the same width all the way around the perimeter of the card, I really think centering is the most overblown factor for cards like that. And for a lot of 90s cards, that's the case. So this card is a big deal to me because it's a card that I've long wanted. I had a chance to get it on ComC like 2.5 years ago right near when I came back to collect Barry Bonds, and could have gotten it for like $95 or something. And I balked at it because at the time it was a little bit more expensive than some of the other ones that had gone, and I always regretted not getting that. This is a very, very difficult card to pull. I can't remember what the odds are in the Beckett, but it is one of the most difficult cards in Stadium Club to pull. I opened a couple of boxes only to pull virtually nothing. The best Bonds card I got was a base card. Actually, I did get one card, a base card as well, that didn't have the foil on there, that it was meant to be placed on there at the end of the manufacturing process. So that was cool. That is a PC card. But this card, I mean, is impossible to pull. I've seen it from afar for a while, and I've always wanted to get it, and I finally did. And this came all the way from Puerto Rico. Just had a weird negotiation with a guy who wanted me to send cash and didn't really want to give me any assurances, and so I just refused. I said I can't do it. I just had a really horrible experience sending cash, and it would be irresponsible and foolhardy for me to do that. So if you can accept goods and services, then we can do a deal. If not, then no. And his whole thing was he's in Puerto Rico. He doesn't know how much it costs to ship here, but Puerto Rico is an American territory. It just costs the same to ship to somewhere in the United States as it does anywhere else, from Puerto Rico to somewhere versus any such place in the lower 48 to another location in the lower 48. So this is really cool to have. I actually had one more sort of same era, 1999, actually Topps autograph come in, and I remember the long-term plan for that was really to hopefully trade it for this card in the long term, but that won't need to happen now. Now I have two cards from 1999, and one of the cool things also about Bonds autographed cards is that there aren't that many. I mean, he didn't sign terribly much. I think 97 Donruss signature was the beginning for a lot of players. It's one of the first widely sort of made and manufactured autograph sets. And so if you think about it, I mean, autographs for Bonds began in 1997 and they were pretty scant. 1998, 1999, this is like a third year autograph, and after a while you go on Beckett, you collect Bonds for a couple of years and you recognize almost every single one, and you realize, man, there are really a finite amount of cards that Bonds has signed. He's since signed a lot more for Panini, but those are unlicensed cards, and they really have no value to me. I personally don't like them. I know that National Treasures is well respected across the hobby, so his rare cards from that set do very, very well money wise. But I have no interest in a card that is not licensed. I have no interest in a card where they have to airbrush, the name of a baseball team off the helmet, hat, or chest or back of a player. I think this is very similar to. Well, I mean, I think it's also so cool that back in the day, in this era, they did splits You know, like the stats put on the back of these cards are actually really interesting. Ranked first in RBIs and number 3 in homers in the 90s. I mean, this is through 98, so who knows how it ended up. We do know that he was the best player by far of the 90s, even though a lot of people think that it's Griffey, even though I, at one point in my life, thought that it was possibly Griffey who was the best. Once you look at the numbers, you will find that, in fact, that is not the case. That Bonds was the best player of the 90s, and it wasn't even remotely close. So I don't know what's in this package here. It doesn't feel like it's reinforced by a top loader. So, ooh, God, yeah. Well, at least it didn't get damaged. I don't think it wasn't reinforced. It wasn't even placed in a top loader. It was just in a plain white envelope, protected by some index cards. But you guys know that I'm working on the Master Ultra set, especially for late 90s. And I needed the Platinum Medallion or the Gold Medallion, excuse me, parallel of this card, of this base card. Man, I'm getting really good lighting here. That's pretty sweet. That medallion looks fantastic. And this card, too, I mean, other than some touching at the bottom there, this card is in really good shape. The surface is really nice. So, pretty happy with this card. Wish that they would have at least thrown it in a top loader, just so that it wouldn't die. I mean, these cards are not expensive. I don't remember how much I paid for it. Really shouldn't ask too much from a seller, I shouldn't ask too much from a seller because it's hard to be a seller on eBay. There's a lot of fees, and I mean, if I paid like 50 cents for that card or whatever, what exactly am I expecting, So I think we try to be understanding as well of people. No harm, no foul. The card didn't get damaged, so we are all good. So let's see what this card is. I hope that this card is protected by a top loader, because you never know if the scissor blade is just going to cut right through a card if it's not protected by hard plastic. So this is the leather and lumber. This is really neat because I recently traded the Alex Rodriguez, a friend of mine, Matt, a long time ago, recommended this set to me, and I remember grabbing it off eBay on his recommendation and thinking, this card really doesn't do it for me like I thought, it might. So I've had it for a long time, but I've been wanting to get rid of it, and I finally did trade it for that card right there to help along my Ultra Master Set aspirations. That's a really spectacular card there, the Diamond Producers. Really glad to add it to the set. A really fair trade in my mind. And then a couple of days later, somebody popped up with nearly a full set of these cards here, the leather and lumber. This is the lumber side, the wooden side, the side that's supposed to resemble wood, and then the leather side here. And this card looks to be in very, very, very nice condition. Very happy with it. As long as that weird sort of rippling texture is supposed to be a part of the card, which I wouldn't be surprised by, then this is a very, very nice card. There's a little bit of wear here on the left edge, but as you know, the edge doesn't bother me that much. And so this card is actually awesome. I actually love it. That just tells you that maybe I wasn't that thrilled by the player, A-Rod. He was a secondary player, and it's not like it was a big achievement to get that card because it wasn't my guy. You can see that the corner there is also not ideal on both sides. But I didn't get this card because it was in perfect condition. I got it because it was an opportune time to grab it off of somebody who was relatively new to the group in Facebook. I just sent friends and family because it was like $40, and I just, if you're gonna try to rip somebody off for $40, then I guess more power to you, and don't really have the time to fuss around with that. But I am also, aware of people who are selling cards, trying to get the most they can for it, and of course I would like to give them as much as possible for it as well. It's hard to be the seller of a card, I don't do it much, and done a little bit more recently, and it's not an easy thing to do. I feel like you have to be on both sides of a transaction sometimes to really understand what that person is going through on that side of the transaction. And the more I try to sell, the more I understand, how difficult it is to make it worth your time even to sell some of this stuff. I mean, the time it takes to package and everything, and the risk you get of somebody not being happy with their card and all this other stuff, like, it's a lot. So, you know, I'm fine with it, and I'm glad the card came through. And it wasn't lost for some reason. Ooh, okay. So this is a big card that popped up. So somebody in the Facebook group has been putting this card up every time anybody asks for a Bonds card. And it was a card that was released only in bankruptcy after Pinnacle had gone bankrupt. And I just have a lot of concern about cards like that. They just, something doesn't feel right about them. I just feels kind of like unclean the way these cards were sort of ferreted out and funneled to specific insiders who then were able to sell them at huge markups. So I'm generally not a fan of Pinnacle, and generally not a fan of Pinnacle bankruptcies. But this card, the Swing for the Fences redeemed special card, I forget the mythology behind it, but I know that this was a card that was not meant to be in packs to begin with. It was supposed to be a card that you get in the mail if you were able to jump through the hoops that they asked you to jump through. I know that some people consider this card a unicorn. I've never seen it in person. I was told that you really do have to see it in person to fully appreciate it. And I would say that that person was right. This card does look a lot better in person than it does in pictures. I thought it might look like this. I feel like I see a little bit of damage here at the bottom edge. And I do. There is. I don't know if you guys can see that. The bottom edge is lifted a little bit, which is a shame. Is it lifted, or is it? It is. It's lifted a teeny bit. I will bring it up with the seller. The seller was good enough to give me this card at a really really nice price. So in one of the situations when you negotiate a decent price, you feel bad going back and saying, hey, like, this card was actually, slightly damaged. I wish I had known that it was slightly damaged at the time. You can't really see it on camera that well, but the bottom edge on the left there is kind of lifted up as if it was sort of, like, dropped on that edge. It's not terrible. I can live with it. It's a nice card. It's the rarest card, definitely, of all the cards that I'll be opening today. I'll have to go back and look at what the Swing for the Fences situation is. But this card is supposed to be very, very difficult, and there's only just a handful of them in existence, supposedly. That's just, so the story goes. Okay, and this last card here then must be the card that in some ways I was most interested to see. Just for refractors, I've just been pretty unfocused, or actually maybe hyper-focused on specifically only the refractors that I must have. So a whole bunch of other refractors have slipped through the cracks, and this is from my friend Kyle, who has been picking up some sick cards of a lot of different players. And when he showed this off, put it up for trade for his guy Jeter, I asked him if he would mind selling it to me, and he does what friends do and sold it to me, and I think at a very, very good price. There was no haggling. He just named a price. It was ultra fair, and so I just grabbed it. And this is one of those refractors that was not high on my list, but one of my friends who's a major Griffey collector says it's his favorite of the refractors, which is amazing to me, because it's possible that this is the least favorite of mine. I mean, I had the base card for a long time from 1994. This is the refractor finally in my hands for the first time. Pardon me as I try to look and see how this card looks in person for the first time. I've had the base card for a long time, not because I opened product back in this era, but because I had a friend who was rich compared to me, at the time who would open boxes and boxes of this stuff. And he was always talking about the refractors, and I just didn't understand what he was talking about. He did give me a base card of Bonds because, of course, like we both collect Bonds. We're both from the Bay Area and both fans of the player. But, like, I never knew, what the big deal was about refractors until many, many decades after 1993, 1994. But this card is nice. There's some fingerprints on it and stuff. And of course, for a lot of cards before 1999 from Topps, there's a greening, or some people call it hulking, and you can see it is pretty prominent here on the uniform and on the bat. I have to compare this to some other cards from the era because this is nice, but I mean the uniform looks like it's almost completely washed out, and I don't know if it's because of the greening that happened, or that's just how these cards look. But the shiny part of the card is still pretty sweet. This is, to me, kind of not a knockoff of 1993, but they didn't really advance the design very far past 1993. The back is pretty off center, I guess. Never saw that, but it's the front that matters the most. There's a lot more space here on this side, so if you were to look at centering, you'd probably look at the here, the edge of the little spikes of Topps, how close that is to the edge, and then how close the furthest tip of Finest is to the other edge, and you can see that maybe the gap there is twice as large as that. And then if you look down at the name, there is a lot more room after Bonds than there is before Barry. So this card definitely was sliced this way, like so. It's a little bit too close to the edge here, and then again here. You can even see that the design of the card fades out here, and that there's even a little bit of a border. So if we could have just shifted this thing over a little bit on the card, it would be perfectly centered. But I just said earlier in the video, in a full bleed card like this, like unless you're really paying close attention, like it's really difficult to see whether a card is well centered. And this card is not well centered at all. You can see that the target, the outer rim of the biggest ring, is not the same distance from the edge. But only a card nerd who is thinking about grading a card would really think about that. Really, the first thing that strikes me about this card is that it's beautiful. The second thing that strikes me about this card is that it's really washed out on the uniform, and I really want to. And his face is completely green. I want to see if maybe the washing out, the greening of this card contributed to the fact that this card looks like he's wearing a uniform worn by orderlies at a mental institution, just all white with a black belt, and a shiny MLB insignia patch on his shoulder. Still, sick card. Really glad to add this to the collection. Thanks a lot, Kai. You can tell that I'm mesmerized by the shine. It's prettier than I expected. This is maybe my least favorite of the Finest refractors from the early years. But, man, maybe I shouldn't have slept on any of the refractors in retrospect, huh? Oh well. Anyways, so what else? We had these other ones come in. I already talked about that one in a previous video. This one came in a trade. And these cards, these X-Fractors or whatever, have just, they were like a couple of bucks just a few years ago, and now they're easily 100 or more for a card that's numbered out of 225. But remember, this card is from 2005, right? It's not from the 90s era. It's well outside. And so these parallels don't mean nearly as much. The design isn't as innovative, and the numbering, they really squeeze the heck out of the numbering systems, so that like there's very, very many parallels. And so the X-Fractor is cool because of the checkered look, but and I traded a card I actually didn't think was worth it for this card, but things have changed in value so quickly that, like, I guess the card I was trading and the card I was receiving was relatively worthless before, and now is not worthless. It's kind of surprising. And this card came in from a guy who collects Bonds. He actually tried to sell me the 98 once, the 1 out of 100 Atomic Refractor. from Bowman's Best, and we agreed on a price, and then he backed out, and then I was not happy about that, of course, but I just let it go, and then he came up with another sale page, and I said, you know what, let me just grab that card, and I got this confused with the 98. This is the 96 atomic refractor. It's not numbered. It's not as valuable because it's not as rare, and I paid like an arm and a leg for this card. But it is in beautiful condition. I think it would grade very, very well. So that is the saving grace. I didn't back out, even though I made an error. I thought that this was the 98 when it was really the 96. But I don't renege on my deals, so I went through with it, and now I have a card, from Bowman's Best, one of my least favorite sets and products. But my first true atomic refractor from that set, I guess, where he's the only person who appears on the card. I do have those mirror image cards with Griffey, Hidalgo, Andrew Jones, but this is the first atomic refractor where Bonds is the only player on the card. So I have to learn to appreciate this card. It's harder to appreciate a card that you spent more money than anybody else on Earth would pay. Maybe more than double what anybody else would pay, just because I mistook it for the card that I missed out on that first time. So I'm hoping to get that 98 from the guy. We'll see. He's not the easiest person to negotiate with, so we will find out. But I'm not a fan of this card that much, and I'm not a fan of 98 that much. I just thought it was be cool to get a refractor. It was kind of like just coming back into the swing of things and looking to buy something cool for my collection, and was impatient and ended up with this. So yeah, and maybe I'll develop an affinity for it down the line. But all right, thanks guys for watching. This was a long one. I will see you guys again soon. Hope talk to you guys then.